Billionaire ordered his food in Spanish to laugh at the waitress, never knowing she spoke 7 languages. And what happened next left the entire restaurant completely speechless. Hello friends. Welcome to our story. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Are you in the United States? The United Kingdom? Maybe Nigeria, Ghana, or South Africa? Canada? Jamaica? We love hearing from you, so drop your location below. Now let's get into this story. The city never really went quiet. Even at night, even when most people had gone home and locked their doors, the city kept humming. Car horns in the distance. Music from somewhere down the street. The sound of a food cart being wheeled across the pavement. The city was always awake, always moving, always reminding you that life was happening, with or without you. Naomi Reed felt that reminder every single day. She was 29 years old, and she had once believed, deeply and completely, that she was going somewhere. Not just somewhere good, somewhere great. She had worked hard for it. She had sacrificed for it. She had spent years learning, studying, practicing, building herself into someone that the world would have no choice but to notice. But the world had not noticed. Or maybe it had noticed, and simply did not care. Now, on a cool Tuesday evening, Naomi stood in the small bathroom of her apartment and looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. She had 20 minutes before her shift started. She splashed cold water on her face, patted it dry with a towel that had seen better days, and pinned her hair back neatly. Then she put on her white uniform shirt, buttoned it all the way to the top, and smoothed it flat with both hands. The shirt was clean. She always made sure of that. No matter how tired she was the night before, she always washed it, always dried it, always ironed it before she went to sleep. It was one of the few things she could still control. She picked up her bag from the floor beside the door. As she did, some papers slid off the small table near the entrance and scattered across the floor. She looked down at them. Bills. 3 of them. 2 red, which meant they were already late. 1 white, which meant it would be red soon. She picked them up, stacked them neatly, and placed them back on the table face down so she wouldn't have to look at the numbers. Then she opened the door and stepped out into the evening. The walk to the restaurant took 15 minutes. Naomi knew every crack in the pavement between her apartment and the front entrance of Alara, which was what the restaurant was called, though most people who worked there just called it the place. She had been walking this same route 5 nights a week for the past 7 months. She knew which street light flickered. She knew which corner smelled like roasted corn from the cart that appeared every evening at 6:30. She knew the man who sat on the bench outside the pharmacy, always reading a newspaper, always nodding at her as she passed. He nodded at her now. She nodded back. Alara was the kind of restaurant that made people feel important just by walking through the door. That was its whole purpose, really. From the outside, it looked like a building made of dark glass and warm light. You could see inside just enough to make you curious, but the glass was tinted so the people inside could not see you staring. The entrance had 2 tall doors made of dark wood with gold handles, and they were always polished so perfectly that you could see your own face in them. Inside, the restaurant was all soft colors and quiet elegance. The tablecloths were white and thick and pressed so flat they looked like they had never been touched. The chairs were dark and heavy, the kind that scraped slowly and quietly against the floor when you pulled them out. Small candles burned at the center of every table, throwing little circles of warm orange light. The ceiling was high, and somewhere above it all, speakers played jazz, the slow, easy kind that moved like water. Crystal glasses sat on every table, and when they were touched, they made a soft, delicate sound that seemed to fit perfectly with the music. The guests spoke in low voices as though the restaurant itself had asked them to keep the noise down. Nobody laughed too loudly here. Nobody raised their voice. Everything was controlled, polished, and precise. This was where Naomi worked. She went through the back entrance, the way all staff did, hung up her bag in the small room where the coats and lockers were kept, and tied her apron around her waist. Her colleague Dennis, a tall man who always smelled of peppermint, was already there, checking his reflection in his phone screen. 7 tables tonight, he said without looking up. Full house by 8. It's always full by 8 on Tuesdays, Naomi said. Manager said there might be a private booking coming in late. Big table. Big bill. Naomi nodded and walked out onto the floor. She moved between tables with the kind of ease that only comes from doing something so many times that your body does it without your brain having to think. She knew the menu from memory, not just the dishes but the ingredients, the preparation method, the wine pairings, the allergens. She could describe a meal in a way that made the person listening actually feel hungry, even if they had just eaten. The guests liked her. They always had. She was calm, she was warm, and she had a way of making people feel looked after without being too present. She was good at this job. She had always been good at whatever she put her mind to. That was the part that hurt the most. The first hour passed the way it always did. Orders taken, food delivered, glasses refilled, empty plates cleared. The restaurant filled up steadily. By 7:30, every table was occupied, and the low hum of conversation had grown into something warmer and more alive. Naomi was at the far end of the room, writing down a dessert order for a couple at table 9, when she heard it. Not words. Not music. Not the clinking of a glass. It was a sound she had come to recognize over years of working in places like this. The sound of a room shifting. The sound of people turning their heads without meaning to, pulled by something they couldn't quite explain. She looked up. The front doors of Alara had swung open. In walked Damon Carter. Naomi had never met him before. She had no reason to know his name. But she knew the moment she saw him, that he was someone who expected to be known. He was young, somewhere in his early 30s, and he was dressed in a way that was so precise and so deliberate that it almost looked effortless. Dark suit. Deep navy, almost black. Fitted perfectly across the shoulders. A watch on his left wrist that caught the candlelight even from across the room. His shoes made a sound on the floor that said they were expensive without needing to announce it. He walked in with two men beside him, both in suits, both carrying the slightly anxious energy of people trying to match someone else's pace. They were talking to him. He was not talking back. He was looking at the room. Not at any particular person. Not at any particular thing. Just at the room. The way you look at something you are deciding whether or not to bother with. Then his eyes moved to the center of the restaurant, to the largest table near the window, the table that was always visible to everyone in the room, the table that could be seen from the street if you stood at the right angle, and he walked toward it without asking, without waiting to be shown. The host, a young man named Joel who was usually very firm about seating arrangements, moved out of the way. Damon Carter sat down. His two associates sat across from him. One opened a leather notebook. The other picked up the menu. Damon did not pick up the menu. He leaned back in his chair, rested one hand on the table, and looked around the room again. Slowly this time, the way someone looks at a painting they are trying to decide if it is worth buying. Naomi finished writing down the dessert order, thanked the couple at table 9, and walked back toward the service station. She glanced at the new arrivals. Table 4, the center window table, had been assigned to her section for the evening. She took a breath, picked up a small notepad and walked over. She had approached hundreds of tables like this. Thousands maybe. She approached them all the same way, back straight, pace calm, eyes friendly, notebook ready. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome to Alara. My name is Naomi and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink while you look at the menu?" One of the associates looked up and smiled. "Water for now, please." "Still." The other nodded. "Same." Damon did not look up. He was looking at his phone. He scrolled slowly, the way people do when they are not really reading anything, just performing the act of being busy. Naomi waited. This happened sometimes. She was patient. Then, without looking up, without putting down the phone, Damon Carter smiled to himself. It was a small smile, the kind that sits on only one side of the face. And then he spoke. But not in English. He spoke in Spanish. His voice was clear and loud enough for his two associates to hear him perfectly, but quiet enough that it would not carry to the next table. He spoke smoothly, casually, like someone who had done this kind of thing before and found it entertaining. What he said in Spanish was this: "Let's see if she even understands basic instructions, or if she's just here to carry plates." His associates exchanged a glance. One of them pressed his lips together to stop himself from smiling. The other looked down at the table. Naomi heard every word. Every single word. She understood every single word. But her face did not change. Her expression did not shift by even a fraction. Her pen was still on the notepad, still poised and ready. She kept her eyes forward, her posture exactly as it had been, her breathing exactly as it had been. She waited one beat. Then two. Then she said in a perfectly normal, perfectly pleasant voice, "Of course. I'll get your water right away. Please take your time with the menu, and do let me know when you're ready to order." She wrote nothing down yet. She walked away. Behind her, she heard one of the associates let out a quiet, low laugh. And she heard Damon Carter say nothing at all. She walked back to the service station, picked up a water jug and stood with her back to the room for just a moment. Her jaw was tight. Her hand, the one not holding the jug, was closed into a loose fist at her side. Not because she was confused. Not because she was embarrassed. but because she had understood every word. And the man sitting at that table had no idea. And something about the way he had sat there with that half smile and those words, so confident, so comfortable in his cruelty, settled into her chest like a stone. She unclenched her hand. She picked up 3 glasses. And she walked back to table 4. Naomi set the glasses down one by one, filled each of them carefully with water, and straightened up. "Are you ready to order?" she asked. Her voice was the same as it always was. Warm, steady, professional. One of the associates ordered first. Grilled salmon, medium, with the lemon butter sauce on the side. The other asked for the ribeye steak, well done, with roasted vegetables. They both spoke directly to her, made eye contact, said please and thank you the way people do when they were raised to be decent. Damon still had not looked at her. He was looking at the menu now, but the way he looked at it made it seem like the menu was the least interesting thing in the room. His eyes moved across the page slowly, lazily, like he was doing it a favor. Then he spoke again. In Spanish. "Tell her to bring the duck. And tell her not to let them overcook it this time, because last time I was at a place like this, the duck tasted like it had been sitting under a lamp for an hour. And make sure she writes it down properly because I'm not sure she's keeping up." His associate, the one with the leather notebook, shifted slightly in his seat. He did not translate. He did not look at Naomi. Naomi wrote down, "Duck. Medium. Not overcooked." "The duck is an excellent choice," she said pleasantly. "Our chef prepares it fresh to order, so it will come out exactly right. Would you like the cherry glaze or the orange reduction with that?" She was looking directly at Damon when she asked. He finally looked up. His eyes met hers for the first time since he had sat down. They were sharp eyes, the kind that were always calculating something, always measuring something. He looked at her the way you look at a chair you are trying to decide if it is sturdy enough to sit on. Then, still in Spanish, still with that same light, amused tone, he said, "Cherry. And tell her I want a side of the truffle potatoes. And remind her to smile more. The face she's making looks like she's been working here for too long." The associate with the notebook cleared his throat quietly. Naomi did not look away. She wrote down the cherry glaze and the truffle potatoes. "Perfect," she said. "I'll have that in for you right away." She collected the menus, turned around, and walked to the kitchen. The kitchen was loud and bright and hot in the way kitchens always are. The sound of pans, the smell of butter and garlic and something sweet in the oven, the voice of the head chef calling out tickets. Naomi pushed through the swinging door, walked to the order window, and placed the ticket down. Dennis appeared beside her, refilling a sauce boat. "Table 4 okay?" he asked. He had seen the man walk in. Everyone had seen the man walk in. "Fine," Naomi said. Dennis looked at her sideways. He had worked with her long enough to know what fine meant when she said it in that particular tone. "You sure?" "I'm sure," she said. And then she picked up a bread basket and went back out onto the floor. The next hour and a half moved the way the rest of the night did, steadily, professionally, without incident. Naomi brought the food. She refilled the water. She checked on every table in her section, including table 4, always with the same calm, polite energy she brought to every table. But at table 4 the comments continued. Every time she came near, every time she appeared at the edge of Damon's line of sight, he found a reason to say something. Always in Spanish. Always just loud enough for his associates to hear, but quiet enough that it would not reach the next table. Always with that same easy, unbothered tone, like he was narrating something mildly amusing. At one point he said, in Spanish, that people who worked jobs like this were people who had simply given up trying to be more. That some people were built for service and some people were built to be served, and it was important not to confuse the two. His associate with the notebook said nothing. The other one laughed. A short, uncomfortable laugh, the kind that is not really about finding something funny but about not knowing what else to do. Naomi brought the dessert menu. She explained the options clearly. She smiled where it was appropriate to smile. And every single time she said nothing. She reacted to nothing. She let every word hit the air and dissolve like smoke. But she heard it all. Every word. Later, when the meal was finished and the table was being cleared, Damon picked up the small leather folder that held the bill. He opened it, looked at the total, and pulled out a card without blinking. He handed it back to Naomi without looking at her, the way you hand something to a machine. Naomi ran the card. She brought it back. She placed it on the table. He signed the receipt. He did not add a tip. He closed the folder, stood up, and buttoned his jacket. His 2 associates stood as well, gathering their phones and notebooks. The 3 of them began to move toward the exit, speaking among themselves about something that had nothing to do with the restaurant. And then just before he reached the door, Damon Carter stopped. He turned around. He looked back across the restaurant, past the other tables, past the candles and the white tablecloths and the soft jazz, directly at Naomi, who was standing at the service station, writing something in her notepad. He walked back. Not all the way. Just close enough. He stood on the other side of the room, but his voice carried easily in the quiet. "Hey," he said. Naomi looked up. He was looking at her now, really looking at her for the first time all evening, with a small, cold half-smile on his face. The kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. The kind that is not really a smile at all. "You should try harder," he said. "Maybe one day you'll be more than this." Then he turned and walked out. The doors swung shut behind him. The restaurant continued. The jazz continued. The candles continued burning. Other guests laughed softly at other tables, unaware that anything had happened. Dennis walked past carrying 2 plates, glanced at her and kept moving. Naomi stood very still. She looked at the door for a moment. Then she looked down at her notepad. Then she picked up a cloth from the service station and began wiping down the counter, slowly and carefully, the way she always did when she needed her hands to be doing something. Her face was calm. But inside something had shifted. Not broken. She was not broken. She had been through too much to be broken by a man in an expensive suit and a cold smile. But stirred. Deeply, quietly stirred. Because those words, "Maybe one day you'll be more than this," had not just been an insult. They had landed somewhere tender. Somewhere she usually kept closed. And they had pressed on it, hard, in the way that only true things dressed up as cruelty can. She finished her shift at 11. She said goodnight to Dennis and to Joel and to the woman who ran the kitchen pass on Tuesday nights. She collected her bag from the locker room, took off her apron and walked out into the cool night air. The city was still humming. She walked home the same way she always did, past the flickering streetlight and the corner that smelled faintly of roasted corn now that the cart had gone, past the pharmacy where the bench sat empty and dark. She walked with her bag on her shoulder and her hands in her jacket pockets. She let herself into her apartment. She turned on the lamp near the door, the one with the warm bulb that made the room feel less small than it was. She dropped her bag. She sat down on the edge of her bed. And she looked at her apartment. It was a small place. One room that served as a bedroom and a living room at the same time, with a kitchen in the corner that was really just a counter and 2 hobs and a small refrigerator. The window looked out onto the building across the alley. There was a bookshelf along one wall, filled, genuinely filled, not for decoration, with books. Dictionaries. Phrase books. Novels in different languages. Study guides with broken spines and pages that had been turned so many times the corners had gone soft. On the table near the kitchen, the 3 bills were still sitting face down where she had left them. On her laptop screen, which she had left open, there were 2 email tabs still open from that morning. She didn't need to open them again to remember what they said. She already knew. 2 more rejection emails from 2 more companies, both of them very polite. Both of them saying the same thing in different words. "We have decided to move forward with other candidates." She had sent out 19 applications in the past 2 months. She had heard back from 11 of them. All 11 had said no. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at all of it. The bills, the laptop, the bookshelf full of languages that no one had found a use for yet, and she was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached over to the small table beside her bed and picked up her phone. She opened one of the language apps she had not opened in weeks. The screen lit up, bright and cheerful, asking her to continue from where she had left off. She stared at it. And in her mind, clear as a bell, she heard his voice again. "Maybe one day you'll be more than this." She put the phone down. She lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, and she let the memories come. The ones she usually kept behind a closed door, the ones she could not afford to sit with for too long because they made the present feel even harder. She remembered the hotel. Not just any hotel. An international one, the kind that had guests checking in from 6 different countries on the same afternoon, the kind where the lobby was always full of different languages overlapping like music. She had worked there for 4 years, starting as a front desk assistant and working her way up to supervisor before she was 26. She had been good at it, better than good. She had been the person management called when there was a misunderstanding with a guest from Japan. She had been the person the team relied on when a group of French businessmen arrived and their translator canceled at the last minute. She had been the one who stayed late, came in early, solved the problems that other people couldn't solve. Because Naomi spoke 7 languages. Not perfectly, she would never claim perfection. But well. Fluently enough to hold a full conversation, well enough to read a contract, well enough to make a person from another country feel, in the middle of an unfamiliar city, that someone understood them. She had never studied abroad. She had never been sent to a special school. She had taught herself, through apps, through books, through listening, through practice, through years of quiet, stubborn effort that no one had asked her to make but that she had made anyway because she loved it. Because language, to her, had always felt like a kind of superpower. Like a door that kept opening into rooms you didn't know existed. English, Spanish, French, Italian, German, Japanese, and Mandarin, still rough at the edges, still being sharpened, but there. 7 languages. And she was wiping down counters at Alara for $12 an hour and no tips. She closed her eyes. The hotel had shut down 2 years ago. Not because it was failing, it had been doing well. But the company that owned it had made a series of bad decisions, and when the numbers stopped working, they had closed 4 properties across the city in a single month. Everyone had been let go. Some people had found new positions quickly. Others, like Naomi, had found that the world outside the hotel looked at her resume and saw experience without a degree, skill without a certificate, and moved on to the next application. Degrees mattered more than skill. Connections mattered more than effort. She had knocked on many doors. She had sent those 19 emails and the 11 before those and the 16 before those. She had gone to interviews where she sat across from people who looked impressed when she listed her languages, and then called 2 days later to say they had gone with someone else. And slowly, without meaning to, she had started to believe them. That was the part she hated most. Not the rejection. Not the bills. But the creeping, quiet voice that had started whispering that maybe they were right. Maybe she wasn't enough. Maybe this, the restaurant, the apron, the wiping down of counters, was just where she belonged now. She opened her eyes. She sat up. She picked up her phone again. She opened the language app again. And this time she did not put it down. She pressed continue and the screen moved to a Spanish vocabulary review, words she already knew but she went through them anyway, slowly and carefully, the way you go through something you love after a long time away from it. Then she switched to another app and reviewed some Italian phrases. Then she picked up the French dictionary from the shelf, the worn one with the red cover, and she read 3 pages, whispering the words under her breath in the quiet of her apartment. She was there for 2 hours. When she finally put everything down and turned off the lamp, the city outside was darker and quieter, and the bills on the table were still face down, and nothing in her life had changed. But something inside her had. She pulled the blanket over herself and stared at the ceiling one more time. Men like Damon Carter came to restaurants like Alara because they needed to feel a certain way. They needed the crystal glasses and the jazz and the white tablecloths and the quiet, well-dressed staff who moved around them without demanding to be seen. They needed the performance of it. And they came back. They always came back. Because a feeling like that was like a drug, and drugs needed to be taken regularly to keep working. He would come back. She was certain of it. And when he did, she decided, lying in the dark with the city humming softly outside her window, when he walked through those doors again and sat at that table and opened his mouth, she would not stay silent. Not this time. She was right. 3 days later he came back. Naomi was at the service station when she heard the familiar sound of the room shifting, that quiet, collective turning of heads that happened whenever someone walked in and took up more space than the room expected. She did not need to look up immediately. She finished writing what she was writing, capped her pen, and then looked toward the entrance. Damon Carter. But this time he was alone. No associates. No leather notebooks. No one to perform for, no one to laugh along with him. Just him, in a different suit this time, charcoal gray, still perfectly fitted, still expensive in every detail, walking across the restaurant floor with the same unhurried, deliberate pace he had the first time. He looked around the room the same way he had before, taking it in, measuring it. Then his eyes landed on her. He recognized her immediately. She could see it in the way his expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. And then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward. He chose the same table. Of course he did. Naomi untied her apron, retied it neatly, and picked up her notepad. She walked across the restaurant floor at her usual pace, not fast, not slow. She reached table 4, stood at the appropriate distance, and looked at him with the same warm, professional expression she gave every guest. "Good evening," she said. "Welcome back." Damon leaned back in his chair and looked at her the way he had at the end of the first night, that cool, assessing look, like he was trying to figure out what category to put her in. "Still here?" he said. "Still here," she said simply. He picked up the menu. He looked at it for a moment. Then he set it down and looked back at her, and something in his eyes said that the menu had never really been the point. "Water," he said. "Still. And give me a few minutes." "Of course," Naomi said. She went and got the water. She brought it back. She set it down. She went back to her other tables, checked on the couple at table 7, refilled a glass at table 11, and came back to table 4 exactly when enough time had passed. "Ready?" she asked. And that was when it started again. He looked at the menu one more time and then he spoke. In Spanish. The same smooth, easy tone as before, the same volume, just loud enough to be deliberate, quiet enough to be deniable. But this time there was no audience. This time he was saying it only because he wanted to. Because it amused him. Because it gave him something. He said in Spanish that the restaurant had clearly lowered its standards if this was the quality of staff they were keeping on. He said the woman standing in front of him looked like she had somewhere better to be and hadn't found it yet. And then, and this was the part that was different from the first night, the part that cut lower and sharper than anything else, he said in Spanish with a small, calm smile. People like you don't move forward in life. You stay exactly where you belong. The restaurant continued around them. A fork clinked against a plate somewhere behind her. The jazz shifted into a new song, something slow and low with a lot of piano. A woman at the table near the window laughed softly at something her companion had said. Naomi stood very still. She looked at Damon Carter. And she felt, in that moment, something that was not anger, not exactly. It was something steadier than anger. Something that had been sitting in her chest for 3 days, being fed quietly by language apps and French dictionaries, and 2 hours in the dark with the city humming outside her window. She took a breath. And then she spoke. In Spanish. Clear. Unhurried. Perfectly formed. The meal is prepared exactly the way you requested, sir. The words landed in the air between them like something solid. Damon's hand, which had been resting loosely on the table, went completely still. The small smile on his face did not disappear immediately. It took a moment, like a light that flickers before it goes out. His eyes, which had been relaxed and faintly entertained, sharpened. He stared at her. Naomi looked back at him. Her expression had not changed. Her posture had not changed. She was still standing at the appropriate distance, still holding her notepad, still completely composed. "What did you just say?" he asked. He asked it in English. Instinctively, without thinking, as though the ground had shifted under him and he needed something familiar to stand on. Naomi repeated herself. In Spanish. Same words. Same tone. Same absolute, unhurried calm. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a space completely, even in a room full of other sounds. Damon looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since he had walked through the doors of Alara on either visit, he did not look like a man who was in control of the room. He looked like a man who had just realized the room was different from what he thought it was. "You speak Spanish?" he said. It came out less like a question and more like a man thinking out loud. "Would you like to order, sir?" Naomi said. His jaw moved slightly. He looked down at the table for a moment, then back up at her. There was something working behind his eyes, something she couldn't fully read, but that looked, for the first time, like genuine uncertainty. Then he did something she had not expected. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened it, typed something and held the screen up toward her. It was a sentence in French. "Is this your first job or have you worked in more impressive places?" He was watching her face carefully, looking for the hesitation, looking for the slight widening of the eyes that would tell him she was bluffing, that the Spanish had been a lucky phrase, something memorized, something rehearsed. Naomi read the sentence. She read it the way you read something in your own language, without moving her lips, without pausing, without any of the small signs of translation happening in real time. Then she looked up at him and said in French, perfectly and without rushing, "I have worked in more impressive places, sir. But the work itself is never beneath me." His phone lowered slowly. He typed again. This time he turned the screen so she could see it was Italian. A longer sentence this time, more complex. Something about whether she found her current position fulfilling given her apparent capabilities. She answered in Italian. Calmly. Completely. He typed again. German. She answered in German. Each time, his expression shifted a little further from where it had started. The amusement was completely gone now. The cool arrogance had gone with it. What was replacing it was something she could not quite name. It was not embarrassment, exactly, and it was not anger. It was something more like the look a person gets when they are somewhere they thought they knew and suddenly realize they have been reading the map wrong the entire time. He looked at his phone for a long moment. Then he typed something longer. Something more deliberate. And he held the screen up again. Japanese. It was a full sentence and it was not a simple one. It was the kind of thing you typed when you were trying hard to find the edge of someone, trying to find the place where they stopped knowing and started guessing. Naomi read it. She took one breath, not because she needed to think about the translation, but because Japanese always asked a little more of her, lived slightly deeper in her memory than the European languages, required her to reach just a little further. And then she answered. In Japanese. Not perfectly, she would never claim perfection in Japanese, but clearly, fully. The meaning was right, the structure was right, and the sentence landed exactly where it was meant to land. Damon lowered his phone. He did not type anything else. He set the phone face down on the table and he was quiet. Around them, the restaurant continued its gentle, unhurried life. The piano and the jazz track moved through a long, slow phrase. Someone across the room ordered dessert. A waiter laughed quietly at something near the kitchen door. But at table 4 there was complete stillness. Naomi stood and waited. Her notepad was still in her hand. Her pen was still ready. She was still, in every visible way, simply a waitress waiting to take an order. But the man sitting across from her was no longer looking at a waitress. He was looking at her. And for the very first time since he had walked into this restaurant, Damon Carter looked small. Not physically. Not in the way of the room. But in the way of a person who has just said something very loud in what they thought was a private language, and discovered, too late, that the person standing right next to them understood every word. Every single word. From both nights. The silence stretched for another moment. Then another. Then Damon leaned back in his chair, slowly, and looked up at her. The expression on his face was one she had not seen on him before. Stripped of the performance. Stripped of the cool, practiced ease. Just a man at a table, looking at someone he had completely misjudged, trying to figure out what to do with that. "Why are you here?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Not gentle, she would not have called it gentle. But quiet. Like a man who was genuinely asking for the first time in a long time, a question he did not already know the answer to. Naomi looked at him for a moment. She could have said many things. She could have said something sharp, something that used his own words from the past 3 days and handed them back to him. She could have been cold. She had every right to be cold. She had earned cold. But she did not say any of that. She said, simply and honestly, because life doesn't always reward what you know. The words sat between them. Damon looked at her. Something moved across his face, something quick and brief like a door opening and closing before you could see what was inside. His eyes dropped to the table for just a second, then came back up. He did not respond to what she had said. Not directly. He picked up the menu again, looked at it for a moment, and ordered his food in plain, straightforward English. The duck, medium, cherry glaze with the truffle potatoes. Naomi wrote it down. "Thank you," she said. And she walked to the kitchen. When she came back with the bread, he was looking out the window. She placed the basket on the table, refilled his water glass, and moved away without a word. She took care of her other tables. She brought his food when it was ready. She checked once to make sure everything was correct. He ate quietly. He did not speak to her in any language for the rest of the meal. When he was finished, she brought the bill. He looked at it, pulled out his card, and handed it to her. She ran it and brought it back. This time, when she placed the leather folder on the table, she saw him open it. She saw him look at the total. And then she saw him pick up the pen and write something in the tip line. She did not look at the amount while she was standing there. She collected the folder, thanked him, and moved away. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, picked up his phone. And then he paused by the table, and he looked at her from across the short distance between them with an expression that was difficult to read, complex, layered, like a sentence in a language she had not fully learned yet. "You're wasting your talent here," he said. It landed differently from anything else he had said across both nights. It did not have the edge of the other things. It did not have the smirk or the coldness or the performance behind it. It was plain. Almost blunt. The way someone says something when they are not trying to impress anyone, not even themselves. Naomi looked at him. "Good night, sir," she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he nodded once and walked out. Naomi stood at the service station and watched the doors swing shut behind him. Then she opened the leather folder and looked at the tip line. $200. She stared at it for a moment. Then she closed the folder and set it down and went to check on table 7. But something was different now, and she knew it, and she could not put it back the way it was. Because when he had said "you're wasting your talent here," she had heard it properly, heard it all the way through, and it had not sounded like cruelty dressed up as observation the way his other words had. It had sounded like the truth. And the truth, she had always found, was the hardest thing to walk away from. Naomi did not sleep well that night. Not because she was upset, she had moved past upset. But because her mind would not stop turning, the way a mind does when something has changed and it is still trying to catch up to the change. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about the $200 in the tip line. She thought about the way his voice had sounded when he said, "You're wasting your talent here," flat and plain and stripped of everything performative. She thought about the look on his face when the Japanese sentence had landed exactly where it was meant to land. She thought about what it meant that for the first time in a very long time, someone had looked at her, really looked at her, and seen something worth seeing. Even if that someone was him. She was back at Alara the next evening and the evening after that. She took her orders, filled her glasses, cleared her plates. Dennis asked her once if she was okay and she said yes and meant it more than she usually did. The bills on the table were still face down. The rejection emails were still in her inbox. Nothing had changed in any visible, measurable way. But she walked differently. She could not have explained it to anyone, but she felt it. Something that had been slightly bent in her was a little straighter now. Something that had been quiet was paying attention again. 4 days after Damon Carter's second visit, her phone rang. She did not recognize the number. She almost did not answer. But something made her pick it up and she pressed it to her ear and a woman's voice said, "Is this Naomi Reed?" "It is," Naomi said. "My name is Claire. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Damon Carter. He'd like to meet with you at your earliest convenience. He has a professional proposal he'd like to discuss in person." Naomi was standing in her kitchen, still in the plain clothes she wore on her days off. She looked at the bills on the table. They were still face down, but she knew exactly what was on the other side of each of them. "When?" she said. The office building where they met was the kind of place that made Alara look modest. All glass and steel in height, with a lobby that had a ceiling so tall it felt like standing inside a very expensive cave. A receptionist directed her to the 14th floor. A second receptionist on the 14th floor directed her to a corner office with a view of the city that went on until it became sky. Damon was standing at the window when she came in. He turned when she entered, looked at her for a moment the way he always seemed to look at things, assessing, measuring, and then gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He sat across from her, leaned forward with his elbows on the desk and got straight to the point. There was no small talk. She had the feeling he did not do small talk. "I run an international investment and trade consulting firm," he said. "We work with partners across 12 countries. A significant portion of our most important client relationships require communication in languages that my current team does not cover adequately. I've had 3 deals in the past 18 months that ran into serious difficulty because of language and cultural gaps. One of them collapsed entirely." He paused. "I need someone who can bridge those gaps. Not just translate words but understand context. Tone. What is being said and what is actually being meant." Naomi listened without interrupting. "The role would be full-time," he continued. "You would work directly with me and with my senior team. You would be in the room for major meetings, on the calls that matter, traveling when necessary." He named a salary. It was more than 3 times what she made at Alara. She kept her face still. She was good at keeping her face still. "There is one condition," he said. He looked at her directly. "You will have to prove quickly that you can operate at this level. This is not a restaurant. The conversations are fast, the stakes are high, and there is no margin for error on the things that count. I need to know within the first 2 weeks that you belong here." The word belong sat in the air for a moment. Naomi thought about the first night. She thought about his voice in Spanish, easy and amused and certain. She thought about people like "You stay exactly where you belong." She thought about the $200 in the tip line. "I understand," she said. "Do you accept?" She looked at him across the desk. He looked back at her. There was nothing soft in his expression. No apology there, no acknowledgement of what had passed between them in the restaurant. Just the offer, plain and direct, laid out on the table like a document waiting to be signed. She thought about the bills. She thought about the 19 applications and the 11 rejections. She thought about the French dictionary with the broken spine and the Japanese phrases she had practiced in the dark. "Yes," she said. "I accept." She gave her notice at Alara that same evening. Dennis hugged her. Joel said he was not surprised. The manager shook her hand and said she had always been one of the best he had had on the floor. She collected her things from the locker room, took off her apron for the last time, folded it neatly and set it on the shelf. Then she walked out into the night and did not look back. Her first day at the firm was a Monday. Claire, the woman who had called her, showed her the office, introduced her to the team and explained the systems. The team was small but sharp. 6 people, all of them highly educated, all of them competent. All of them watching her with the careful, measuring look of people who had been told someone new was coming and were not entirely sure what to make of it yet. She settled in. She read everything she could find about the firm's current clients and pending deals. She asked questions when she had them and listened carefully to the answers. By the end of the first week, she had helped with 2 calls. One in French with a client in an international finance group, one in Italian with a partner firm that had been having difficulty communicating a contract revision to Damon's legal team. Both had gone smoothly. The team noticed. But the real test came at the end of the second week. Damon called her into his office on a Thursday morning and told her there was a meeting the following day with a group of Spanish investors. They were considering a significant stake in one of the firm's largest current projects. A deal that had been in negotiation for several months and was finally, carefully, approaching the point of agreement. The meeting would be conducted primarily in Spanish. The investors were from a specific region, and they used a particular style of business Spanish that was dense with technical financial terminology and regional expressions. "This is the most important meeting we have had in 8 months, Damon said. "Everything needs to be exactly right." Naomi nodded. She spent that entire evening preparing. She sat at her kitchen table. The bills were gone now, replaced by printed documents, financial glossaries, industry terminology lists in Spanish, and she went through everything she could find. She practiced phrases. She read reports. She listened to recordings of similar business negotiations online, replaying sections, pausing on words she was not sure of, writing them down, looking them up, practicing them again. She went to bed at 2 in the morning feeling as ready as she could be. The meeting was in a large conference room on the 14th floor, all clean lines and glass walls and a long table with water glasses at every seat. The investors arrived as a group, 4 of them, all men, all in dark suits, all speaking to each other in rapid, fluid Spanish before they had even sat down. And the moment they began to speak in a professional context, Naomi understood that this was a completely different thing from the Spanish she had practiced at hotel front desks and restaurant tables. This was fast. That's technical in a way that moved quickly from one layer to the next, layering financial terms over regional expressions over industry-specific shorthand, all delivered at a pace that assumed everyone in the room had been living inside this language and this industry for years. She kept up, mostly. She translated smoothly through the opening exchanges, the introductions, the early discussion of the project overview. Damon glanced at her once during this section and gave the smallest nod. She was doing well. And then the lead investor, a compact, serious man named Mr. Ruiz who had said very little during the introductions but who was clearly the one whose opinion mattered most, leaned forward and began speaking rapidly about a specific clause in the proposed agreement. He used a term Naomi had not encountered in her preparation. Then another. Then a phrase that she recognized the individual words of but whose combined meaning, in this specific financial context, she was not certain of. She translated as far as she could. And then she stopped. The room noticed. Damon looked at her. Mr. Ruiz paused and looked at her. Everyone at the table looked at her. And in that moment, Naomi Reed faced the choice she had known, somewhere deep down, was always coming. She could guess. She could approximate. She could take the pieces she was confident about and smooth over the gap with something plausible sounding and hope that it was close enough and that no one would notice. Or she could be honest. She took a breath. She turned to Mr. Ruiz directly and in Spanish she said, "I apologize. Could you slow down slightly on that last point? I want to make sure I'm translating the exact meaning of that term correctly. I don't want anything important to be lost." The room was very quiet for a moment. Mr. Ruiz looked at her. His expression was unreadable, the kind of face that had been in too many high-stakes rooms to give anything away easily. Then he looked at Damon. Damon's expression was also careful. He was waiting. Then Mr. Ruiz sat back slightly and something in his face shifted, something small and quiet like a door opening just a crack. He said in Spanish that he appreciated the care. He repeated the passage more slowly and clarified the term. Naomi understood it completely. She translated it for Damon and the rest of the team fully and accurately, and the meeting continued. Afterward, as the investors were gathering their things to leave, Mr. Ruiz stopped near the door and said something to his colleague in Spanish, not to Naomi, not to the room, just to his colleague, quietly, the way you say something you mean only for one person. But Naomi was close enough to hear it. He said, "A translator who admits what she doesn't know is worth 10 who pretend they know everything." She did not translate that for the room. She kept it for herself. On the way back to her desk, she passed Damon in the corridor. He did not stop walking, but he looked at her as he passed and said simply, "Good." Just that. One word. But from Damon Carter, she was beginning to understand, one word meant more than most people's paragraphs. She was in the firm for real now. She could feel it, Not just in the way the team looked at her, which had shifted from cautious to something warmer, but in the way the work itself had begun to open up around her. More calls. More meetings. More moments where she was the only person in the room who could take what one side was saying and carry it, intact and accurate, to the other. She handled a call with a German engineering firm that had been stalled for weeks over a misunderstanding in a contract clause. The misunderstanding had been linguistic, buried in the difference between two words that looked similar but meant different things in a legal context. She caught it. She explained it clearly to both sides. The call ended with an agreement. Damon called her into his office the next morning. "That German situation," he said. "How did you spot it?" "I've read a lot of contracts," she said. "In a lot of languages." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Start reviewing all incoming contracts before they go to legal. Flag anything that looks like it could be a translation issue." It was not a question. But she understood that it was also, in its way, a form of trust. She started reviewing the contracts. And slowly, steadily, the firm began to rely on her in ways that went beyond language. Because the thing about understanding 7 languages is that it is not really about words. It is about people. It is about the way a Japanese partner's silence in a meeting means something completely different from a French partner's silence. It is about knowing that in some cultures, a direct no is considered rude and what sounds like enthusiasm might actually be polite hesitation. It is about reading a room in 3 dimensions while everyone else is only reading it in 1. Naomi had always been able to do this. It was the thing the hotel had relied on her for, the thing she had carried quietly through the years of rejection letters, the thing she had practiced in the dark of her small apartment while the bills sat face down on the table. Now, finally, it had a place to be. Damon noticed. He could not have missed it even if he had tried. And the thing about Damon, she was learning, was that for all his arrogance, and it was still there, still present, still surfacing in the way he spoke in meetings and in the way he moved through spaces, he was also genuinely intelligent. And genuinely intelligent people, she had found, eventually recognized useful things, even when it cost them something to do so. He began asking for her opinion. Not just on language matters, on everything. On the tone of a proposal before it went out. On the way a meeting had gone and what she had read in the room. On whether a particular client relationship felt stable or fragile underneath the professional surface. She gave her opinions honestly. She did not soften them to suit what she thought he wanted to hear. Sometimes he agreed. Sometimes he pushed back. Sometimes they sat across from each other in his office or in a conference room and went back and forth on something until one of them landed on something the other could not argue with. It was not a friendship. She would not have called it that. But it was real. It was mutual. It was something she had not expected to find in this place, with this person. He was still Damon. Still proud, still sharp, still capable of walking into a room and immediately making it feel like his room. He still sometimes said things in meetings that made her jaw tighten. Not to her but to others, in that same cool, dismissive way that had first made her notice him across the floor of Ilara. He had not become a different person. But something between them had changed. And she carried that change carefully, the way you carry something you are not entirely sure of yet. It was on a quiet afternoon about 2 months into her time at the firm, that the change took on a new shape entirely. She was at her desk reviewing a set of Italian documents when Damon appeared in the doorway of the small office she had been given. He stood there for a moment and she could tell from the way he was standing, hands in his pockets, weight slightly back, that this was not a work conversation. She put down the documents. He came in and sat in the chair across from her desk. The visitor's chair, she noticed, which felt strange given that in every other context he was the one with the large office and the view of the city. He was quiet for a moment. She waited. "There's something I should tell you," he said. She looked at him. "I knew about you," he said. "Before the restaurant. Before any of it." She stayed very still. "A woman I used to work with years ago when I was starting out, she mentioned you. We were having a conversation about language skills and she brought up this woman she knew, someone who had worked in her hotel, who could move between 7 languages like it was nothing. She said you were the most naturally gifted communicator she had ever seen in a professional context. And that you had disappeared after the hotel closed. That no one seemed to have picked you up." Naomi said nothing. She was listening to every word. "I looked into it," Damon said. "It wasn't difficult to find you. The hotel had records. People remembered you. And then I found the restaurant." He paused. "I went there to see if what she had described was real. I told myself I was going to walk in, observe, have a straightforward conversation and decide from there." He stopped again. His eyes dropped to the desk for a moment. "But that's not what happened," he said. "No," Naomi said. "It's not. I didn't plan to say what I said. His voice was measured, but there was something in it that was not comfortable. But I also didn't stop myself. And I came back a second time and did it again. He looked at her directly. I'm not going to give you a long explanation for it, because there isn't one that's good enough. I want you to know that I knew who you were. And I behaved the way I did anyway. The room was quiet. Naomi sat with what he had said and let it settle. She turned it over carefully, the way you turn over something fragile to check all its surfaces. She thought about the first night, the Spanish words easy and amused, the chuckle from his associates, the receipt with no tip. She thought about the second night, people like you stay exactly where you belong. She thought about sitting on the edge of her bed with the language app open and the bills face down on the table. She thought about the fact that all of it, the job, the salary, the contracts, the German call, the Spanish meeting, all of it, had grown directly from the soil of those 2 nights. It was a strange and complicated thing to sit with. Why are you telling me now? She asked. He looked at her. Because you deserve to know. She thought about that. Then she said, it doesn't change what happened. No, he agreed. It doesn't. And it doesn't change what I've done here. No, he said again. It doesn't change that either. She nodded slowly. She looked at the Italian documents on her desk, then back at him. I appreciate you telling me, she said. And she meant it, not warmly, not easily, but genuinely, in the way you mean something true that is also hard. He nodded. He stood up. He went back to his office. Naomi sat at her desk for a long time after that, not reading the documents, just sitting. She felt many things at once, things that did not all point in the same direction, things that did not resolve neatly into a single feeling. She felt the discomfort of knowing that her opportunity had come wrapped inside his worst behavior. She felt something that was not quite anger but was adjacent to it. She felt, underneath all of it, the solid, unshakable knowledge of what she had built here with her own hands. The call she had saved, the deal she had helped close, the contract she had caught, the respect she had earned in that meeting room when she chose honesty over performance. Nobody had given her those things. She had brought them with her. She picked up the Italian documents and went back to work. The months that followed were the most professionally alive she had felt in years. She moved through the firm with a confidence that was not loud. It never had been loud, that was not her way, but that was deep and solid and real. She knew her value now. Not because someone had told her. Because she had proved it over and over, in rooms full of people who had not expected her, and she had not flinched. And then, slowly, quietly, like a tide going out, things began to change. The first sign was a meeting that did not go well with a group of investors from a country the firm had been trying to build a relationship with for over a year. Naomi had done everything right in that meeting, the language, the tone, the cultural reading. But the numbers on the proposal had not been right, and no amount of skilled communication could cover that. The investors left without committing. Damon came out of the meeting with a look on his face that she had not seen before. Not cold, not arrogant, but tight. Wait. She said nothing. She went back to her desk. The second sign was when she heard, through Claire, that 2 of the firm's largest current deals were in difficulty. Details were vague, but the feeling in the office shifted. Small things, the kind you only noticed if you were paying attention. Shorter conversations in the corridors. Fewer people staying late because there was work to do, and more staying late because they were anxious. Damon spending longer in his office with the door closed. The third sign was the day her salary came in 2 days late. She did not say anything to anyone. But she noticed. Damon called a full team meeting 3 weeks after that. He stood at the front of the conference room and he was still Damon, still straight-backed and precise, still someone who occupied a room, but there was something different in his face. Something that had been removed. Some layer of certainty that had always been there before. He told them the truth. The firm was in serious difficulty. 2 major investors had withdrawn. A deal that had been expected to close and generate significant revenue had fallen through completely. The operating costs could not be sustained at their current level. He was going to fight to turn it around. He said that clearly, and she believed him because Damon Carter did not say things he did not mean, but he could not promise them anything. He was sorry, he said. She had never heard him say that before. Over the next 6 weeks, she watched him fight. She helped where she could. There were calls to be made, partners to be spoken to, relationships that might yet be saved if the right conversation happened in the right language with the right tone. She made those calls. She had those conversations. She stayed late and came in early and did everything she could think to do. But the numbers were the numbers. And the numbers did not change. The firm closed on a gray Friday morning. Damon gathered the team, what was left of it, because 2 people had already found other positions and left in the preceding weeks. and he told them it was over. He thanked each of them individually. When he got to Naomi, he held her gaze for a moment, and she saw in his eyes something she had not expected to see there. Gratitude. Real, unperformed, honest gratitude. You were the best thing this firm had, he said quietly. She nodded. She picked up her bag and she walked out of the building for the last time. The city was the same as it always was outside. Loud, tired, full of people going somewhere. She stood on the pavement for a moment and breathed in the cold air and let herself feel the weight of it. The loss of the salary, the loss of the work she had loved, the familiar and exhausting feeling of being back at the beginning. Not broken, she told herself, but tired. She was very tired. She found the translation firm through a job board, 3 weeks later. It was a small company that provided professional translation services to businesses and legal organizations. The work was steady and real, documents to be translated, calls to be interpreted, occasionally a meeting to attend. The pay was modest. Nothing like what she had been earning. But it was honest work and she was good at it, and they valued her from the first week without needing to be convinced. She settled into it. She paid the bills, on time now, all of them face up. She bought a new lamp for her apartment, one with a warmer bulb than the old one. She went back to her language apps in the evenings, not out of desperation this time but out of love, out of the quiet pleasure of keeping something sharp that you had worked hard to build. She thought about Damon sometimes. Not with anger. The anger had never really come, or if it had moved through her and left without staying. More with a kind of complicated, unresolved feeling, the way you think about a chapter of your life that was real and significant and also imperfect in ways that cannot be fully untangled. She did not know where he was. She did not ask. And then, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 4 months after the firm had closed, Naomi's manager called her into her office and told her the translation firm had been invited to provide interpretation services for a major international business meeting. A large deal, multiple parties, several languages required. It was the biggest contract the firm had been offered, and they wanted Naomi to lead the interpretation team. She said yes. The meeting was held in a large hotel conference room, not a Lara, not the kind of space that performed its elegance, but functional and serious, with a long oval table and chairs for 12 and water glasses at every place. She arrived early as she always did, and set up her materials and reviewed her notes and spoke quietly with the 2 junior interpreters she had been assigned to work with. The other parties began arriving. She stood near the side of the room, watching the door, going over her preparation in her mind. And then the door opened one more time. And Damon Carter walked in. She saw him before he saw her. He looked different. Not diminished. Damon would never look diminished, that was simply not in his nature. But changed. The way a person looks when something hard has happened and they have sat with it and come through it and arrived somewhere new. The sharp edges were still there, but there was something alongside them now that had not been there before. Something quieter. He was with 2 people, not associates in the old sense, not people performing their proximity to him, but colleagues, it seemed equals of some kind. Then he looked across the room. And he saw her. He was still. For just a moment, 1 beat, 2, he was completely still. And then he walked toward her, and she stood where she was and let him come, and when he was close enough they looked at each other the way 2 people do who have shared something complicated and have not seen each other since the last hard part of it. Naomi, he said. Damon, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked around the room and something in his expression shifted into the same calculating focus she had always known. Reading the space, reading the people in it, planning the next move. But when his eyes came back to her, the calculation was gone. You're interpreting today, he said. Leading the team, she said. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. That's good. They were quiet for a moment. Around them, the room was filling up, other people finding their seats, low voices crossing in several languages. Then Damon said, I'm rebuilding. I can see that, she said. It's slower this time, he said. More careful. Pause. I'm doing some things differently. She looked at him. She believed him. Not because she was naive, she was not naive, she had never been naive, but because she had watched him say he was sorry in a conference room full of people he had let down, and she had heard it and it had been real. I'm glad, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I want to ask you something. And I want you to know that whatever you say, I'll respect it. She waited. I'm building a new company, he said. Smaller. More focused. International but leaner. And I want someone who can do what you do, not just the languages but the reading of rooms, the judgment, the honesty. He paused. I'm not offering you a job. I'm not asking you to work for me. He was careful with the words, deliberate. I'm asking if you would consider being a partner in what I'm building. The conference room was almost full now. Someone across the table was adjusting a microphone. One of the junior interpreters looked over at Naomi from the corner of the room, ready for her signal. Naomi looked at Damon. She thought about the first night. The Spanish words. The smirk. The receipt with no tip. She thought about her apartment, the cracked mirror, the bills face down on the table, the language apps open in the dark. She thought about the Japanese sentence landing exactly where it was meant to land, and the look on his face afterward, all that performance and arrogance stripped away, just a man who had been wrong and knew it. She thought about the German call and the Spanish meeting and the Italian contracts. She thought about what she had built inside that firm with her own hands, her own mind, her own quiet and patient and undeniable skill. She thought about what it meant to be offered not a job, not charity, not a salary that made up for something, but a seat at the table. She had been waiting for that seat for a long time. But she had one thing to say first. She looked at him directly, the way she had looked at him across the restaurant floor when she had answered him in Spanish for the first time, clear, calm, unshaken. I'll consider it, she said. But I have one condition. He met her eyes. Name it. Never look down on me again, she said. Not in a meeting. Not in a corridor. Not in any room in any language in front of anyone. Never again. Damon was quiet for a moment. And then he nodded. Not a quick nod, not a performative one. A slow, deliberate nod, the kind that comes from a place in a person that knows it is agreeing to something real and is willing to carry it. Never again, he said. Naomi held his gaze for one more moment. Then she straightened, turned toward the room, gave her junior interpreters the signal, and walked to her place at the table. She sat down. She opened her notepad. She was ready. Not because someone had finally seen her, though someone had finally and that mattered, she would not pretend it did not matter. But because she had never stopped being ready. Through the small apartment and the cracked mirror and the face-down bills and the rejection emails and the restaurant shifts and the Spanish words in the dark. She had never stopped being ready. She had always been ready. She had just been waiting for the room to catch up. The meeting began. And Naomi Reed, calm, composed and completely seen, opened her mouth and spoke. And every word landed exactly where it was meant to land. I hope you enjoyed watching this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. Like, share, subscribe and comment on the lessons you've learned. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. See you in the next one.